Justin Trudeau has done it again. Another baffling comment that has Canadians shaking their heads. This time, it's not about carbon taxes or international scandals. No, this time, it's about ketchup. Yes, ketchup. In a bizarre attempt to address the growing trade tensions with the United States, Trudeau casually suggested that Canadians should simply switch from Heinz to French's Ketchup to avoid tariffs. But what Trudeau didn't likely realize is that his offhand remark could have devastating consequences for Canadian jobs and businesses. His words have sparked outrage not just from industry leaders, but from everyday Canadians who are tired of seeing their livelihoods put at risk by careless political rhetoric. And while Trudeau has already announced his resignation, comments like these are a stark reminder of why his leadership has faced so much criticism. Even in his final days, his words continue to stir controversy and leave Canadians questioning the long-term impact of his policies. Stay tuned because we're diving into the full story behind Trudeau's ketchup controversy, the fallout it's causing, and what it means for Canada's economic future. You won't believe how this one ends. When Justin Trudeau brought up Heinz's and French's ketchup during a press conference, it seemed like a harmless example. But for many Canadians, it was anything but.
The example from last time was Heinz's ketchup being replaced by French's ketchup, because French's was still using Canadian tomatoes in its ketchup. Having Canadian consumers have alternatives to having to spend tariffs on American inputs is part of how we make sure that we don't bear, or Canadians don't bear, undue costs around tariffs.
Trudeau's comments were meant to highlight how Canadians could avoid paying tariffs by choosing locally made products. But what he failed to acknowledge is the deeper impact of his words. In 2014, Heinz shut down its Leamington, Ontario plant after over a century of operation, sparking outrage and fears of economic devastation for the region. However, most of those jobs were eventually saved when Highbury Canco, a Canadian company, stepped in to take over the facility and continue production. While the community managed to recover, the closure of the Heinz plant still left a bitter taste for many Canadians, symbolizing the challenges of maintaining domestic manufacturing in a globalized economy. French later gained popularity for using Canadian tomatoes in its ketchup, but Kraft Heinz has since returned to producing ketchup in Canada, reopening the debate about loyalty to Canadian-made products. Kraft Heinz was quick to respond to Trudeau's remarks, calling them misleading. In a statement, the company emphasized that Heinz Ketchup has been made in Canada since 2020, employing over 1,000 Canadians at its Mont-Royal, Quebec facility. We are proud that Heinz Ketchup is made in Canada by Canadians using Canadian tomatoes. By casually bringing up this example, Trudeau not only reopened old wounds, but also raised questions about his understanding of Canada's manufacturing sector. Critics argue that his comments oversimplify the challenges faced by Canadian businesses and workers, especially in the face of looming U.S. tariffs. And it's not just about the ketchup. Trudeau's remarks highlight a larger issue, the growing tension between Canada and the United States over trade. With Trump's proposed 25% tariffs on Canadian goods, businesses are already on the edge. Instead of offering reassurance, Trudeau's comments have only added fuel to the fire. So what does this mean for Canadian jobs, and how are industry leaders reacting to Trudeau's latest blunder? Let's take a closer look. Trudeau's comments about Heinz and French's ketchup may have been intended as a lighthearted example, but the fallout has been anything but. For many Canadians, it's a reminder of the fragile state of the country's manufacturing sector and the challenges of competing in a globalized economy.
The bottom line, as you say, is that import tariffs, like the 25% that President Trump is proposing, are actually paid or would be paid by American consumers. And if and when Canada needs to respond with equivalent tariffs on imports from the United States, those would be paid by Canadian consumers. That's why we will look, as we have in the past, at things that have replacements for Canadian consumers that wouldn't be tariffed.
While Trudeau's point about tariffs being passed on to consumers is technically accurate, his proposed solution, encouraging Canadians to buy local, oversimplifies the issue. industry leaders argue that the real problem lies in the lack of long-term support for Canadian manufacturers, even with companies like Highbury Canco stepping in to save jobs. The manufacturing sector continues to face significant challenges from rising costs to international competition. Then there's the looming threat of U.S. tariffs. With Trump proposing a sweeping 25% tariff on Canadian goods, businesses across the country are bracing for impact. Trudeau's comments, instead of offering a clear plan to protect Canadian jobs, have left many wondering if his government is prepared to handle the economic fallout.
Donald Trump has signaled a new deadline for Canada. The newly sworn-in president says the harsh 25% tariffs on Canadian imports could come into effect as early as February 1st. That's left the federal government preparing their position and respond.
The stakes couldn't be higher. For Canadian businesses, it's a matter of life and death in an increasingly hostile trade environment. And for Canadian consumers, it's about whether they'll be left footing the bill. So, how is this Liberal government planning to respond to these challenges, and what does this mean for Canada's economic future? Trudeau's ketchup comments may have sparked outrage, but they're just the latest in a series of missteps that have defined his final days in office. With his resignation already announced, the Liberal Party is facing a leadership vacuum at a time when Canada needs strong economic direction more than ever.
Well, I think we should start responding today. I think that we should publish for consultation a retaliation list. I think it should be massive, right? It should be 200 billion. That's not saying that we retaliate at 200 billion, but giving us like a menu, like a smorgasbord of choices. And we need to publish it now.
The fallout from Trudeau's remarks has only added to the perception that the Liberal Party is struggling to find its footing. As the party prepares for a leadership race, candidates like Chrystia Freeland and Mark Carney are already facing tough questions about how they plan to address Canada's economic challenges. But recent controversies have made one thing clear: whoever takes the reins will inherit a party that is deeply divided and a country that is increasingly skeptical of its leadership.
And it has become clear to me that if I'm having to fight internal battles, I cannot be the best option in that election.
Critics argue that Trudeau's comments reflect a broader issue within the Liberal Party, a tendency to focus on symbolic gestures rather than concrete solutions. While encouraging Canadians to buy locally is a nice sentiment, it does little to address the structural issues facing the manufacturing sector or the looming threat of U.S. tariffs. And then there's the question of public trust. With Trudeau's resignation, many Canadians are looking for a fresh start. But this latest controversy in a long list of missteps has raised doubts about whether the next Liberal leader will be able to chart a new course or if they'll simply continue the same pattern of missteps and miscommunication. The stakes of the Liberal Party couldn't be higher. As the leadership race heats up, the party's ability to present a clear and compelling vision for Canada's economic future will determine whether it can regain the trust of voters or risk being left behind in the next election. So, what's next for the Liberal Party, and how will Trudeau's final days in office shape the future of the Canadian economy? Before we continue, I have a quick favor to ask. If you're enjoying the content, why not take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel? Believe it or not, over 98% of you watch without subscribing. Hitting that button is free and helps us out more than you know. Thanks a bunch. Now let's get back to the video. Trudeau's comments may have grabbed headlines, but they also highlight a much larger issue: Canada's position in an increasingly volatile global trade environment. With the United States threatening sweeping tariffs and other nations vying for economic dominance, Canada's strategy is under more scrutiny than ever. The reality is that Canada's reliance on the U.S. as its largest trading partner has left it vulnerable to sudden policy shifts south of the border. Over 75% of Canadian exports go to the United States, meaning that any disruption, like Trump's proposed 25% tariffs, could have devastating consequences for industries ranging from agriculture to manufacturing. But Canada isn't without options. Experts argue that diversifying trade relationships is critical to reducing dependence on the U.S. and safeguarding the economy. recent efforts to strengthen ties with the European Union through the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, CETA, and with Pacific nations through the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, CPTPP, are steps in the right direction. However, these agreements remain underutilized, with Canadian businesses slow to take full advantage of new markets. At the same time, Canada's domestic policies play a crucial role in its ability to compete globally. High taxes, regulatory red tape, and rising costs of production have made it harder for Canadian businesses to thrive, even in their own backyard. Critics argue that without significant reforms, Canada risks falling behind in the global race for economic growth and innovation. Trudeau's comments about ketchup may have been a misstep, but they've sparked an important conversation about Canada's trade opportunities. As the country faces mounting pressure from the US and other global players, the next Liberal leader will need to focus on more than just damage control. They'll need to craft a bold, forward-thinking trade strategy that ensures Canada remains competitive on the world stage. Trudeau's comment about ketchup may have been meant as a light-hearted example, but they've sparked a serious conversation about Canada's economic future. From the manufacturing sector to the grocery store shelves, the ripple effect of his words are being felt across the country. As the Liberal Party looks to rebuild and Canadians brace for the impact of US tariffs, one thing is clear: the decisions made in the coming months will shape the country's economic future for years to come. What do you think? Are Trudeau's comments just another political gaffe, or do they reveal a deeper problem with Canada's leadership? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more updates on the stories that matter most to Canadians.